Hey there, my name is H. Jane Harrington. I am the author of the Guardian Vambrace series. So, some of my friends and family are not really readers. They love audiobooks, but they're just not comfortable with reading. So, they've been asking me for years if I could record my novels for them. So I was thinking, what better time than now, right? You know, we're all being responsible to limit the spread of this pandemic. And so we're all, practicing social distancing, hopefully. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to give a little bit of fun to everyone that's kind of feeling like they're stuck inside. So I'm going to read my novels in video format for you. I'm going to do one chapter per video per day, and I'll have a playlist of them. If you decide you're enjoying them, you might decide you want to go get them on Kindle or on Amazon. That's fine. And if not, then enjoy it for free on the video. So I will put the video link in the description. So what is the Guardian Vambrace? What is the series? Does it have a label? What's it all about? Guardian Vambrace series is fantasy. It's adventure. It's sword and sorcery. Epic fantasy. There's a lot of labels you could put on it. It has a touch of humor. It's got loads of character development because I'm really big into that. It's got a little bit of mystery. It even has a little bit of love without the mush. I mean, it's not a love story, but there's a little bit in there. It's more of a relationship story, really. But it's also more than that. It's more than a label. So I was inspired heavily by Japanese mythology. The story does not take place in Japan, but the mythology is more rooted in like Asian ideas, Japan, China, Korea. It's more so than the Western world. It's not really got a lot of Tolkien-esque ideas in there. It doesn't have elves, dwarves, goblins, things like that. It does have dragons. Dragons are very Asian too. It's more of the Asian dragon than it is the Western idea of a dragon. But it has more oni and yokai, which are called kaio in my world. Those are the creatures. So the classes might remind you a little bit of some of the more antiquated Asian ideas, like maybe Confucian even. For example, the warrior class might remind you a little bit of the samurai to a certain extent. The ruling class is kind of a loose variation on the Joseon era of Korea. So some readers have noticed the similarity also to Westerns with my worlds. When the story was originally conceived, a few decades ago, it was intended as a Western, really. I was writing a lot of Westerns back then. But it quickly kind of became evident to me that this particular story worked more as a fantasy. So, I kind of turned it that way, but it does still retain some of its kind of Western inspirations. So, the other big inspiration for me really was anime and manga, but Final Fantasy video games too. If you've ever played Final Fantasy video games, you're after my heart, because I've always had kind of a soft spot, even back since like the early days of Nintendo, when Nintendo was kind of young and we were still playing the 16-bit, we couldn't even save. Can you imagine playing a video game, an RPG that you can't save? That's kind of what we had to do back then. But Final Fantasy, it's always been real close to my heart. My favorite game is 9. I also love Final Fantasy 7, so of course I can't wait for April 10th, I think, for when the new Final Fantasy VII comes out. You will probably notice, though, that the 7 typical magics in my series, they're kind of based on the magic systems in Final Fantasy to an extent. One of the cool things for me, every time they bring out a new Final Fantasy game, I see a lot of kind of similarities to things that are in my books. That kind of thrills me because to me, it kind of says I'm on the same brainwave as what the writers for the Final Fantasy series are thinking too. And it's all coincidence, purely coincidence. For instance, Hope kind of looks how I imagine Vaughn to look. He's a little bit like Vaughn in 13. Lightning, all the time she reminds me of Kier. In fact, I have on my desktop I've got the Final Fantasy 13 array with Lightning and Hope because she reminds me so much of Kier. Just coincidence. If you think about Final Fantasy 15, Noctis and his party, they're a party of 4, they're traveling. We've got young Prince, we've got Gladio, who's a lot like Malachar, Prompto, who's a lot like Skillio. So, playing these games, it almost feels like you're kind of playing a little bit, with some of my characters to an extent. Not quite, but a little. Also, think about Final Fantasy 12, the character Vaan. His name is similar. It's not spelled the same. It's not the same name, but it's very similar to my Vaan. They even kind of look a lot alike. So that was really cool. And it was a coincidence. I hadn't played that game when I started writing these. So when I played the game years later and realized, wow, there's a lot of similarities. It's just, I don't know. For me, that's really fun. I actually named Vaan in honor of the tea house where I started writing the series. The little tea house is no longer in business now, but it was on Vaan Circle. I think the locals pronounce it Van because it's kind of a family name where I live here, and the name is pronounced Van, but I pronounced it Vaan. You can call Vaan whatever you want. If you want to pronounce his name Van, I'm sure he wouldn't mind at all. So let's talk about then the characters. It kind of leads us into the characters. So the main character is Kier Ithinar, and she is a typical character type in Japan called a tsundere. Now, a tsundere is a character, usually a female, that starts out kind of dark, cynical, troubled, kind of cold. Over the course of the story, becomes warmer, more friendly, softens and grows and develops. Tsunderes are often found in a story with a lot of character development, and it can be the driving force behind their behaviors and actions that kind of help propel the plot along. So it's so important that the name of Ithinar's Bloom, the very first novel, is actually Ithinar's Bloom. If you think about it, what that means, it is paying tribute to Kier's change and growth and development. She's blooming through the course of the story. And that's how important it is. She has as much of a destiny as Vaan does, even though neither of them realize it at the time. So Vaan's personality was very much inspired by my dear husband. There is kind of an innocence and a naivety about Vaan that is really incredibly charming and can also be really frustrating. Kier brings it up a lot, and she blames it on the fact that Vaan is kind of pampered, that he grew up very sheltered. And I think sometimes she misses the idea that it's not just his upbringing, it's Vaan's personality. Innately, that's who Vaan is. He always sees the brightness in people, sometimes to his detriment. And so, that kind of, it reminds me a lot of my sweet husband. He's amazing, just like Vaan is. So, I'm nothing like Kier. There's parts of me that wish I was more, and parts of me that I'm glad I'm not like her. But she's really, really fun to get into her head. So Vaan and Kier are kind of the opposite ends of a spectrum. They begin to pull each other toward that common middle, though, which is always important in a relationship. You want to have similarities even through your differences. And so Kier and Vaan being so different in a lot of ways, they're actually good for each other because they help each other grow by pulling each other towards that common middle. So we also meet some other characters along the way. They become central to the story, and I won't go into too much of that because I'll let you enjoy them, but Skillio is the kind of playboy. He's a goofball. He brings a lightness to the group, often when it's needed the most. And Denny Malachar is kind of the rock that kind of bolsters the party, rounds them out, and he provides them kind of a sense of warrior class security. So the story itself, there are 4 novels that I have published right now. We have Ithinar's Bloom. Book 2 is Valoria's Honor. Book 3 is Shunatar's Folly. Book 4 is Bardian's Redemption. Now, I've got Book 5, about halfway finished. The manuscript is on my computer, and it's called Warrior's Lament. I'm trying to get back to that. I've been kind of busy in my life. Things have come up, but I'm getting back to working on that. So these 4 novels are published, so you can find them at Amazon. They're all on Kindle. If you get a chance and you enjoy them, please leave me a rating. I'm not very good at marketing myself, so that's one thing. It's a goal I have this year to try to market myself a little better. So Ithinar's Bloom, which is the book that I'm going to start reading to you, this was written in a series of arcs, and I did that intentionally. Initially, I was writing an anime. I've always enjoyed anime and manga, and so when I was writing it, it was playing out in my mind in manga frames, kind of like anime shots in my head. A lot of people have told me that when they read my books, they can visualize it in their head, kind of like they're watching a movie. And that's the way I see it when I'm writing it, but I see it more in anime form. But I'm an artist, and kind of what I found out, not every artist is good at every style. What I learned is that I'm not the greatest manga artist. I'm really good in other forms, specifically like portraiture, like photorealistic portrait art. Manga is just not my thing. So I decided to write them as a manuscript because I thought, well, maybe someday, I'll get around to getting better at drawing. But for now, they turned into novels. So the first one was kind of written in these story arcs like an anime would be. And the arcs follow the characters. They're all tied together. They have, almost individual storylines, but they're tied together as one story. And it follows the journey of the characters. The first book, they're traveling. So the second novel, Valoria's Honor, is not really written in arcs. It's kind of more of a novel flow to it. But what happened when I was writing this, these actually were the same book. I was intending the Guardian Vambrace to be a trilogy initially. And some blogs that I read said, you know what, just write. Don't worry about word count, don't worry about anything, just write. And that's what I did. But I got about halfway through what became Valoria's Honor, and I realized that this manuscript is really, really long. And I did a word count at that point, and I don't remember what it was, but it was just like astronomically high. And I said, you know what? This doesn't need to be a trilogy. This needs to be a 6-part series. So I split the one into 2 parts. And I wrote an ending to Ithinar's Bloom and an opening to Valoria's Honor that kind of ties them together. So really, I wrote Valoria's Honor. I wrote Ithinar's Bloom to get to Valoria's Honor because this was really supposed to be the ending of this. But they do work individually very well as individual novels. So you might notice, if, some keen-eyed readers have noticed it, if you look at the first chapter of Ithinar's Bloom, it is called Flight of the Princeling. The first chapter of Valoria's Honor is called Flight of the Guardian. You will notice there's a lot of similarities. That was intentional. Those were written about sort of the same idea from 2 different perspectives. So in the first book, Vaughn, in the first chapter, is being chased. And he's describing, with Vaughn's kind of noble thoughts and sense, what it is like to be chased. In the second book, Valoria's Honor, that chapter is about Kier being chased. Kier and Vaughn approach being chased in kind of different ways. And so I love to play with perspective. To me, it's really fun to see how 2 different people can view the same type of event in very different ways. I love that perspective idea. So, keep an eye out because I like to play with perspective in my novels. You might see some other, kind of things where the same event is being described by 2 different characters in kind of different regards. So, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to email me. My email address is guardianvambrace@gmail.com. You can also ask comments, ask questions in the comments of the video. And to start us off, I'm going to show you some introduction stuff for Ithinar's Bloom real quick. So I'm going to open this up here. Here's the cover page. And it was copyright 2010. And it says, for Terry, my soul whisper. That's my sweet hubby. And I have some thanks in there. And now it's hard to see because I was using a pencil when I drew it. Later on, I updated this map. But this was the first map that I drew of Septaria. There are 7 islands. And so I'll try to post a picture of that so you can see it better. So the first part says, the gods looked upon the world and saw that chaos reigned. And they said, let us raise this world in fire and build it anew, and let our gifts of order be realized. Excerpt from the Book of Order, King Lauren edition. The first section is the Crown Hater. So we will pick it up in chapter 1. I hope to see you there, and I hope you enjoy my series. Thanks for joining me today. Bye-bye.